All right. So, back finally after a couple weeks of not being able to do this stuff. So, yeah, let's just get into it, I guess. So, I haven't really looked at this code base since the since the day that I did all that crazy streaming where we did like 8 or 9 hours of streaming that day. So, there's a bunch of sort of cleanup to do and stuff that's not finished yet. And maybe what we'll do is take a look at where we left off and then talk a little bit about some of the things that I'd like to get done today. So where we kind of left off was we were working on this UI here, but we kind of have this just served as a static blade template at this mockup endpoint, just so we could sort of play with everything sort of outside of the regular TDD backend loop, just kind of get the UI working with the intention to sort of plug it into the real data in the database and stuff after we kind of got the UI interactions and stuff working the way we want. So for the most part, this kind of works, right? Like we can go through and we can select episodes. You can see like the data down here is updating. We can go and pay. This is just using like the fake Stripe adapter that we put together. Whoa, that's interesting. That could be a problem. So something that I just noticed in terms of a little bit of polish bug is if we try and tab from this email field to the credit card form, it doesn't work. It closes the modal. And that's because I tried to be forward thinking in how I implemented how closing this modal works. So you see what we did is if we look at the pay button, it has a complete purchase modal. And if we look at the complete purchase modal, the complete purchase modal has an event listener somewhere here for focus out. So basically what it's doing is it's listening for when any of the elements in here lose focus. And it's trying to check if focus moved somewhere outside of the modal, then close the modal. But what's happening is we're trying to tab to this Stripe input, and the Stripe input is hosted in an iframe. So I'm guessing what's happening is it's triggering closing the modal because it can't really tell that the iframe is hosted inside this div. We could try and debug that and troubleshoot it, but I kind of think overall a better way to handle this for now would be to just get rid of this handle focus out behavior. And maybe just have it close on escape or something instead, which we might already have in place. Yeah, we have the escape stuff in place. So why don't we just get rid of the losing focus handling for now so that we can kind of just work with it without worrying about that stuff getting messed up. So anyways, you can see here we can select like 3 episodes, go in, put in some information. And you know what I'm not doing is I'm not building this thing. So bear with me for a second here. We'll make sure that we got our assets building. And then we'll refresh and try this again. All right. So do a hard refresh. Select 3 of these. Fake company. Animatexample.com. If you just mash 4.2 back and forth really fast, that's a really good way to fill out these test Stripe forms. Anyways, that'll process, and probably we'll get an error because you know how anytime that you build something, it breaks when you're not doing anything with it. You haven't actually touched anything, but somehow it ends up breaking. So no big deal. We probably just haven't even implemented this backend part yet, but we'll figure that out. We can go take a quick look maybe. If we look here, handle submit. So we try and make a request to that endpoint, and then we log the response. So probably what's happening is this isn't working because I bet if we check the database, we actually don't even have this podcast in there or anything like that. And again, this is hard coded, so we'll have to update that anyways. But no big deal. Suffice to say, that's kind of what we built UI-wise. We kind of got this form in place. So a couple things that I wanted to do. First thing, maybe not the first thing, but one of the things is right now this entire page is not keyboard accessible at all. Like I can't tab around and highlight these items or unhighlight them or anything like that. These should each sort of behave like a checkbox, really, right? Like each one of these boxes is kind of a complete checkbox. So for accessibility reasons and just to make the experience nicer for anyone who wants to use a keyboard, I think it would be good to make this thing work with the keyboard. And we also haven't really put much thought into the responsive UI. So you can see it's not like the worst thing in the world, but we do get some weird wrapping happening, and some stuff overlaps here and stuff like that. So maybe it would be worth exploring a better, more optimized way to display this stuff on mobile. And we also don't have a thank you page in place. So like when someone goes to pay, after they're done paying, if it actually works, we didn't put together a UI that'll actually say, hey, you're done. So that's something that we could work on too. So let's think about where to start. Part of me wants to start with the thank you step first, maybe. So instead of, let's think here. How could we do this in a way without actually having to drive out the back end? We could make a post request to just some dummy endpoint or something for now, just to maybe test it out. Maybe that's a good way to do it. So if we head over to our routes folder, where we have this mock-up endpoint, I'm just going to have a post endpoint for test. We'll delete this. Obviously, this isn't actually meant to actually work or anything like that. But for now, we'll just have this return response, JSON, and we'll just have it return an empty JSON response with a 2.0. Which one's created? 204 or 201? I can never remember. 201 created. Okay, so we'll just have this return a created for now. So if we head back here, we can just make a post request to test. And why don't we actually just put some data in here, like message test endpoint hit, something like that, just so we can kind of debug things a little easier. Since you can see, we're going to log out that response. So let's go ahead and refresh this whole thing. We'll pull up our network here and the console, and let's just see if this gets us to a point where we can actually implement what the thank you screen might look like. So we'll just fill in all this junk and enter. So hit the test endpoint. You can see we did get a response back, and we did get that logged. Cool. All right, so now that we're able to sort of stub this out a little bit so that we can actually make some sort of request and see it come back successfully, we can basically, modify this component to actually show some sort of thank you thing. So I think the simplest way to do that is probably, why don't we just take this whole content and wrap this in another div so we can kind of show one or the other. So we'll move this up, and maybe we'll add a flag here, just like we have working. Why don't we have something like complete? We'll set that to false, and down here we'll set working to false and complete to true. And how about we only show this if not complete? And then we'll show another div underneath it that we can show if it is complete. So why don't we just maybe copy the styles for this complete your purchase header, throw that in there, and we'll just say something like thanks. And then maybe we'll repeat this message that we had. We'll reach out for your sponsorship information after you've confirmed your purchase. So why don't we just say something like, we'll be reaching out for your sponsorship information via email soon. And why don't we reverse these conditionals for a second, just so we can just load the page up and see the thank you one off the bat. Okay. So this isn't amazing, but it's not terrible. either. Probably eventually we'd want to be able to have like a download your receipt or something like that. But I kind of think maybe we should limit the width of this so that it wraps a little bit nicer. So up here where we have this p tag, why don't we also give that a max width of small? Just kind of see where that gets us. Maybe extra small. See if that wraps a little bit nicer. Yeah, I mean, like that's a little bit nicer. It's kind of sucks when you have like one or two orphaned words at the bottom of something. Cool. So why don't we reverse these conditionals again and then just test out this flow, just kind of see what happens. Ultimately, we probably want to do some kind of cute transition or something here, but I think just to make sure that things are even working the way we expect, this will be good enough to get started. All right, so processing. Thanks. We'll be reaching out for your sponsorship information via email soon. Seems pretty decent to me. We could even go to like a whole separate page that had a receipt and stuff if we wanted to, because then it is kind of a little bit weird that you're left on this same page where you can select more episodes to sponsor and stuff like that. But I think this will do for now, and we can always iterate on it and improve over time. So why don't we make a commit just to kind of get this in place here. So I'm going to open up the GitHub app. And all right, so here we go. All right, so I don't want to commit. I haven't been committing this mockup endpoint because I don't actually want it in the repo, but maybe we will commit it for now since we probably want to commit this test endpoint for this to actually work. So we'll just commit all this, and we'll just say show a simple thank you message after purchase. Cool. Okay, so the next two things is like the responsive layout stuff and the keyboard accessibility stuff. So I think the keyboard accessibility stuff is maybe more interesting. So maybe we'll start there. Yeah, the VIF and VLs thing, I thought about that. The only reason I decided to not do that is because I want the primary form to show first. And this is like the else case, right? So I could say VIF not complete, and then I could say VElse. But to me, it is a little bit confusing to see all this markup and then see this VElse here and not even be able to see what the condition was on the same screen. Vue didn't used to have VElse at one point. You sort of had to do it this way anyways. And if you wanted to use vShow, I don't think you can use VElse with vShow. It has to be with VIF. So typically I just write the full condition with the inverted version of the condition. Okay, so let's talk about making this keyboard accessible. So I've got a page pulled up here that talks about using the checkbox kind of area role or the checkbox role in HTML when you're trying to make something behave like a checkbox, even though it's maybe using custom markup. So there's a couple things that we have to handle here. We have to display, we have to have an area checked attribute that says whether or not the checkbox is checked. And I believe it has to respond to the space bar. So we'll have to have a tab index so that it's focusable. And when it's focused, we should be able to hit space to toggle it on and off. So why don't we work on that? So maybe to start, let's just add a tab index to these elements. So if we head back to the new sponsorship page, where's our V4? Where do we loop over this stuff? So these LIs, I think each sponsorable slot in the LI should be focusable, right? So we can do that by just saying tab index equals 0, and then it'll kind of automatically be put into the tab index flow based on where it actually belongs in the HTML. So that should be enough that we can hit tab, and now we can actually start tabbing through them, right? So that's progress. But if you look at the actual thing, there's nothing on here telling us whether it's checked or not, right? So to make this properly keyboard accessible and properly accessible in general, we're going to want to make sure we give each one of these divs a role of checkbox, since the whole div kind of behaves like a checkbox. And then make sure that we're setting this area checked attribute. So let's give it a role of checkbox. And there's probably other stuff that we should do to make it fully accessible, but I'm not an expert in that field, so there's definitely things I don't know, like how do we make the labels, actually get read out to you by a screen reader and stuff like that. So maybe if we want to go, all in on accessibility, that can be a topic we explore in another screencast, and making sure that everything works with the screen reader, because it's something I'd actually like to learn a little bit more about myself. But in addition to this role, we also need this area checked thing, right? So here, why don't we just do area checked, and we can bind area checked to this stuff. So actually, you know what? What am I doing here? We should be putting this stuff inside of the actual sponsorable slot component. So let's head over to the sponsorable slot.view component. And maybe what we'll do is we'll give ourselves a little bit more room in terms of separate lines here. We'll move the class up to the very first line, since it can kind of bleed off, and that's no big deal. But then after that, we'll add a tab index, a role, and then the area checked stuff. So this way we can say area checked should be bound to selected. Now, something I'm not sure of off the top of my head is if it'll automatically stringify Boolean values. So we can probably just see what happens. Okay, so if we go and check out like this div, we can see role checkbox area checked true. This one's role checkbox. And now this doesn't actually have an area checked field. It actually gets removed, which is not what we want. We want to make sure it's always there, but it's either true or false. So I think the easy way to do that actually is to just say selected, then true is a string, because it actually is a string, right? It's not like a real JavaScript Boolean value in the DOM. It's just a string. So this way, it should hopefully preserve it for both. So now we say area checked false for this one, which is what we wanted. Area checked true for this one. And if I uncheck it, you can see that switches to false, back to true. So that's pretty good. Cool. So I think the next thing that we want to do is the spacebar stuff, right? So if I just hit space when I'm on this thing, nothing happens. And that's actually sort of surprising to me, because I thought that if something was focusable, that space simulated a click. I'm sure I've seen that behavior before, but maybe we'll have to implement it manually for now, and then we can explore that later. So why don't we say on key down dot space. Now we'll start by just duplicating this logic, but I think to avoid this duplication, we'll extract a method here that we can call. Okay, so now I can toggle that with a space bar. So that's pretty good. That feels like pretty good. I think we can improve the focus styling of some of this stuff. And that's actually something that is going to be a little bit easier in the newest version of Tailwind, which we can upgrade to. So before we do that though, let's create a new method in this component so we can extract that duplication. So why don't we just have a toggle method here, and in toggle, we'll just do this. We'll just say this.$emit input, not this.selected. Yep, it's very similar to the toggle input in the view course. Although I feel like I didn't have to do keydown.space in the view course, but maybe I did. Okay, so let's check this out. Make sure it's still working. Yep, everything still seems good. Cool. All right, so why don't we do some focus styles. So if you check out Tailwind CSS release notes, a couple days ago, 6 days ago, I put out version 6 or 0.6. where we added an outline none utility for suppressing standard focus styles. So kind of like the default ugly blue outline, which it looks bad in a lot of cases because outlines in CSS don't follow the border radius of an element. So you can see here, these elements have like really rounded corners, but the outline doesn't actually line up with the rounded corners. So you get this kind of gross little gap. So we added an outline none utility for suppressing that so that you could provide your own focus styles. It's definitely not a good idea to just suppress it without providing your own focus styles, but as long as we provide our own focus styles, then we should be good. Okay, key down dot space dot prevent. Yeah, seems reasonable to prevent the default behavior. I think that's probably fine. Okay, so let's upgrade to the newest version of Tailwind. So I think we can just do yarn add Tailwind CSS at 0.6.1. And I wonder if that actually updated it. Yep, it did. Oh, it's already in dev dependencies. Okay, so let's update the dev dependency one. And then let's just check here, make sure that it's only in one spot. Yeah, I always forget to do like -d. Not that it really matters in a Laravel project like this, but let's try and keep stuff organized and move everything up there and get rid of our regular dependencies. Yes, sponsorship is an app that I'm building for helping me manage sponsorships for Full Stack Radio. It's not a big long series of videos about sponsorships. Okay, so now that we have these focus styles, we're going to want to upgrade our Tailwind config file. So the main things that we're going to want to change are actually in the release notes. You can see I have a diff down here where you can view the changes to the default config file. So since we generated a config file, we're going to want to make sure that we update our config file to match. So in this case, I think we've already extended the padding scale and margin scale. The main thing that we want to do is add a new module, a couple new modules here. So for background colors, we want to add focus styles by default there. So if we head over to our tailwind.js file and head down to the bottom, we can replace our background colors key with this one. I mean, we could just kind of do this by hand. So we're going to do border collapse. So we added some styles for tables too. So we can add that here. Any other new modules? The outline module. I forgot to highlight this in the diff, but it is new. And I guess that goes here. Okay, so we just have to kind of go through and decide what other things we want to be able to style on focus. So one thing I think would be the border colors. I think by default, we just did border colors. Yeah, font weights on focus seems reasonable. So we'll make those editable on focus. Shadows, text colors, and text style. So we'll just match the default config as much as possible here. So we'll do hover styles and focus styles for shadows. Focus styles for text. Whoa, can't type. And focus styles for text style. Yeah, I do add more padding and margin values on every single project. So that's why in actually the newest version of Tailwind, we increased what we ship with. So instead of just stopping at 8, we added 5 in between, and now we also add 10, 12, 16, 20, 24, and 32, which should be a better starting point for most people and makes our what am I trying to say? Our CDN builds a little bit more useful. Should Axios be in dependencies? So with Laravel projects, it actually doesn't matter whether you go dependencies or dev dependencies, because the reality is it's not a JavaScript project, right? So this stuff only needs to be here for when you build your actual final CSS. So you can put it in either dev dependencies or dependencies. It doesn't actually super matter in this case. Maybe putting everything in regular dependencies is a better idea. Doesn't personally, I just want them all in one place or the other. I think by default Laravel puts everything in dev dependencies, so I try to remember to do -d when I'm adding new stuff, but sometimes I forget. Okay, so what were we doing? We were going to add some focus styles for this stuff. So right now we got this kind of ugly blue outline. So why don't we start by just suppressing that outline like very bad people. And we'll just say on focus, we want no outline. So you'll see now that we've refreshed, when I tab to it, not to another tab, but when I tab to it, you know what we need to do? We need to restart our watcher because we updated Tailwind. And maybe there's an error in our build, in our Tailwind config file. It looked like there was something around background position. We're missing a comma. Damn commas. Okay. Let's rebuild it again. Okay, so now when we tab to it, you can see I can toggle it on and off with the spacebar, but you have no indication that it's highlighted, which doesn't really seem ideal to me. So let's add some focus styles. So there's the easy thing to do here is basically see where we have hover, border, indigo, light. Why don't we add that same thing on focus too? So we'll say focus, border, indigo, light. And now if we refresh, we can see when we tab to it, we get those same outlines. So now we can follow it kind of nicely, which is cool. One thing that we're not seeing is when you hover, you actually get the style on the icon too. We're not getting that on focus. Maybe we would want that on focus. Right now, that wouldn't actually be easy with Tailwind, but in an upcoming Tailwind release, that'll actually be a lot easier because we can generate our own variants. So we can make a, you'll see here we actually have like a group hover variant. So when the group is hovered, which is this whole element, we show a different icon. We could also set this up using the in development version of Tailwind, where we could build our own group focus variant. So anytime the group is focused, we can add some styles. So we can't do that right now, but once I tag a release that has that feature in it, that's something that we'll be able to do. Okay, so we can tab through all this stuff. Seems pretty decent. One thing maybe we can tweak is the focus styles for this button. We get that outline again, which isn't terrible, but it doesn't line up with the border radius, which is kind of ugly. So, two different ideas I have for that. One is we could just give it the hover styles on focus where it changes the color, but I think it's nice to have an outline there too. So something else we added in the new version of Tailwind is a new default shadow that we ship with, which was called Shadow Outline. So its goal is to look pretty similar to the to like a regular browser outline style, but it's implemented using a box shadow so that it actually follows the border radius. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to add that to our Tailwind config too, so that we can play around with that style. So let's head up to the shadows config and we'll add that value here. And the default outline shadow is just a blue shadow based on the blue that we ship with by default in Tailwind. So let's give this that style and just kind of see if we like how it looks. So let's head over to pay button and we'll put the styles in here. So we'll say focus, outline none, focus, shadow, outline. And now if we head back here and refresh. Yeah, so that's a much nicer looking focus style, I think. It matches the border radius. You can still clearly see that it's focused, and that looks pretty good. If we wanted to, we could add an outline shadow that's based on this indigo color that we're using, which could be interesting to do just as kind of like an exercise and showing how it would work. So I'll show you how I would do that. If we go to our colors config here, the pay button is using, I think, just BG indigo, right? So if we check out our indigo color here, here is the hex color, right? We in the Tailwind config for the shadows are using a semi-transparent version of that color. So the easiest way to do that would be to convert this to RGB and then add an alpha channel to it. So if we look at this actual style, you can see if I shift click the color in DevTools, you can cycle between the different color formats. So if we switch to RGB, we can copy this value, we can head back here, and we could pull in a library to do this too if we wanted to. But just for the sake of kind of doing things quick and dirty, we'll do it this way. We'll add another outline here, and why don't we say outline indigo? And see how we have this alpha channel where it's 0.5? So we just want like the regular RGB version with a 0.5 alpha channel. So add this RGBA, set it to 0.5, get rid of these spaces to be consistent. And now if we head back to the pay button, instead of just shadow outline, we could say shadow outline indigo. And now we should get like a nice kind of purpley outline instead of the blue one, which kind of blends with the button better. So yeah, I think that's pretty decent. So in general, this thing is like pretty keyboard accessible now. We can kind of select 3, unselect this one, select this one, tab down to pay, hit space on pay. And now this opens up and we get our focus styles here. So maybe what we should do is try and make the focus styles in the modal consistent and get kind of all that focus stuff sorted out. And then we'll move on to some responsive stuff if we have time. So let's head over to the complete purchase modal. And do we have a prop for controlling if it's open? It looks like yes. So maybe in the pay button where we have modal open false, why don't we default it to true? So that whenever we refresh the page, we get the modal as open. So it's a little bit easier for us to kind of play with. So I think what we're going to want to do here is style these inputs to have a focus style that's more consistent with like what we're doing for these elements, where we use like the shadow with the nice border radius. So instead of this kind of gross blue one, we'll add our nicer one. So why don't we add that to this input first? So we'll say focus, shadow, outline. If we refresh this, okay, so you can see we're actually getting stacked styles now. The browser outline is there and our new shadow, and that looks terrible. So let's make sure that we get rid of the default outline on focus. Okay, so that looks a lot better to me. You can see like there's the old style, here's the new style. It's a little bit softer, it matches the corners nicer. Just in general, I think it looks a little bit more polished. So let's apply that same set of styles to the other inputs here as well. So React kind of versus Vue. I think they are conceptually very, 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 very similar. I think it's just a matter of which one jives with you better. Vue tries to do a lot more for you. Like it has more opinions about how to handle certain things. So like it has concepts like computed properties, for example, which React doesn't have. And that's not a dig at React. It's just like the React kind of mental model is more like, okay, well, if you want a property to be computed, you just call a function in your render function that returns the value. If you want to cache it, well, you can cache it however you want. It almost tries to intentionally do less so that it's simpler conceptually and there's just less moving parts. Whereas Vue tries to solve more problems on your behalf. I think that's probably the main conceptual difference between the two. So some people just like having that control and don't like being told what to do, which Vue kind of does a little bit for you. And for those people, React might be the better fit. But a lot of other people, and myself included, although a lot of the React ideology appeals to me, is that, a lot of people kind of don't want to make decisions. They just want to follow conventions and have like a community agreed upon best way to do certain things. So just kind of play with both. If you're comfortable with React, Vue will be really easy to pick up, and you'll probably notice right away the things that it does for you that React doesn't, and you can kind of just decide if you like its opinions or if you'd rather have more control. So it looks like we got the styles working for both of these. The trickier one is going to be this stripe a stripe input because it's not really a regular input. But I think we can do it by providing some styles. So let's go check out the stripe elements documentation. And if we head over to the reference and look for where it's doing styles, let's just do a search for something in here like base. So here we go, the class name applied when the element is focused. So do they give an example of this? Sometimes I'm too lazy to try and like figure out hierarchically what I'm even looking at here. So here we have style, base, and then nested under base, you have all this stuff. Okay, so we just want to do classes. Okay, so let's just give this a classes attribute. And I think all we have to do is under the focus, just give it a string for classes that it should apply. So we might be able to just do outline none and then shadow outline. And let's see what we get. Yeah. Okay, so that gives us like a matching style. And that looks pretty good to me. Next is this button. So let's go ahead and style that button. So if you look at our complete purchase modal, we're just using a plain old button here. Let's add the same styles that we have on the pay button. And at this point, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, it seems like we kind of got like a little bit of duplication going on here. Is there anything that we could do to simplify this? So one way that we could remove some duplication in terms of, you know, these classes that we're trying to keep synchronized between the pay button and the complete purchase modal button is to extract a component in Tailwind, which is maybe not a terrible way to go. Another approach would be to create a view component for that sort of thing. Trying to decide if I even care. Like, I actually don't really care because it's not really going to be that painful yet, but maybe something we can explore later. Okay, so let's see. So we got some nice outline styles on everything. Everything feels pretty good. One thing that's kind of shitty is right now we can tab from this button and it loses focus of the modal. You can see like if I tab backwards from the modal, I can tab between this button and this input, which is probably not ideal. Like, I think in a perfect world, we kind of want to focus trap everything to the modal until the user closes the modal. But yeah, I'm trying to think of the best way to do that, because the tricky thing about focus trapping is if we're on this button and we hit tab, it's not probably the best idea to break tabbing out of this into the browser's sort of Chrome. So it might be something that we should revisit or something we should research a little bit to best understand what some of the best practices are around focus trapping without breaking the ability to tab back to the rest of your operating system. But maybe it's actually not that big of a deal. So yeah, I don't know. Why don't we try it? I think that's not unreasonable to do. So this is what I'm going to try. On this input, we'll add a key down listener. And so actually here's a question. How do we listen for shift tab? If we look for, where's like the views, key down stuff, event handling, key modifiers. alt.67. So can I just do shift.tab? And let's try the same thing on this button. So this would just be tab.prevent default. See if we got this right. This is just kind of a trial and error thing. So I can't tab backwards now, which I think is good. And from here, I can't tab forwards. Now this probably doesn't work on every device because like in iOS, Safari and stuff, you're not actually pressing tab, right? You're just pressing like the next icon. Trying to make something really, really keyboard accessible turns out to just be like a very, very hard problem if you're trying to get things totally right across a bunch of different browsers. And we actually have an issue here where if I do shift tab, it's not working because that's still including tab. So I almost want to be able to say like on tab without, but maybe that's what exact does. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Tab.exact.prevent. Yeah, this is good. Okay, so we got focus trapping working. If I hit escape, it can be closed. So I think that's still pretty good. Cool. So someone mentioned in the chat they were curious to see how you would extract component styles with Tailwind, just kind of as an exercise, so we can simplify this button styles. So why don't we spend a minute just to kind of take a look at how that would work. This is what I would do. In Resources, Assets, CSS, you can see here's all my CSS for this project, which is basically I have none. It's all generated by Tailwind. So if I want to add a custom component class, I could do something like .button, and then I could head over to the pay button. I could copy all these styles, kind of paste those in, and then kind of selectively pick and choose which ones make sense to keep. So I don't think text large should be baked into every button. The padding is probably safe. Letting normal, that's probably good. Font bold is probably good. Text white probably shouldn't be baked into the button. The background color probably shouldn't be baked into the button. I think focus outline none is reasonable to bake in, but maybe it should have a regular outline shadow. Now we actually can't do this way, but that's fine. So here we can do like add apply, and we can apply all these styles, and that will get baked into a button class. So let me check something. Do I have post CSS nesting set up? So we should be able to do and focus. And then for focus styles, we can apply these. So we can say on focus, we want no outline. Instead, we want the shadow outline. So if I've done this right, we get an error. Apply if you're sure that px5 exists. Oh, you know what the problem is? Post CSS import breaks when you have classes that are not in, or when you have an import statement that comes after regular CSS. So let's add a new file here. We'll call this components.css for now. Probably eventually we would want to have like a buttons.css file, but I would extract that from the components.css file. So here we'll import /components.css. And we'll keep our comment here. And let's see. Okay, so the build worked there. So now if we head back to pay button, I should be able to add button and then refresh this. And we'll add this to the complete purchase button too. And the styles don't change, but now we should be able to like selectively delete classes that aren't necessary. So for example, px5 and py2, we baked those into button. We baked letting normal and font bold into button. We baked rounded into button. We baked focus outline none into button. So with any luck, this should look exactly the same. And it does, okay? So the next step is to sort of create a button indigo, right? Like kind of like the styles for this. So I've copied the remaining styles. We don't want button because we're going to apply that in the DOM. We don't want block and width full because that's sort of specific to this instance. They're not always block level full width. So we'll get rid of that. Text large, I still don't want to bake that in. I think that's per kind of use case. Sometimes you might want large text, sometimes you might want regular size text. But an indigo button should have white text. It should have an indigo background. Are we missing hover styles? Does this not have? Where are we? Oh yeah, okay, got it. So we'll copy this too. We don't need the MB4 because that's based on its context. The hover styles we want and the focus styles we want. So let's add on hover, we want to do something, and on focus, we want to do something. So on hover, we want to apply we want to apply BG indigo light. And on focus, we want to apply shadow outline indigo. And now we can delete this. And if we head over to our complete purchase modal here, we should be able to remove some more classes. So if we add button indigo, well, we can get rid of text white in BG indigo and focus shadow outline indigo. Now we do have a little bit of a dilemma here because we only want to apply this hover style if we're not working. So if we are working, so maybe that's actually the easier way to handle this. If we are working, then the hover style should just be BG indigo. So don't allow basically overriding it. So let's see what we get here. So that still seems okay. And we have a working state even when there's validation errors. So maybe that's like something to look at in the next screencast, is basically properly handling validation errors on the front end, but we should probably wire up the back end before we do that. Okay, so that looks okay. Now we can do the same sort of changes to this pay button. So this can be button indigo. We can get rid of the padding styles. We can get rid of the line height, font weight, font color, backgrounds, border, all these focus styles. So now what we're left with is just like button indigo, and then anything that's like specific to this situation where we want it to be text large. Yeah, you can. So the add apply stuff in Tailwind, the question is, doesn't it need to have a dot at the beginning? And it doesn't. It's optional. So it supports a dot or not a dot. The reason that it supports the dot is because if I remember correctly, let's install Post CSS highlighter. Post CSS syntax highlighting. Okay, so syntax, Post CSS. So this actually looks okay with Post CSS, but I think I was using less syntax highlighting for all my CSS, or maybe it was because I was using less files. And you can see it highlights things weird when there's no dot, but if I add the dot, it was highlighting things nicer. So the only reason I even ever made it support the dot was because it led to nicer syntax highlighting. But lately I've just been omitting it completely and not worrying too much about the fact that the highlighting looks weird. If you use a Post CSS highlighter, it looks fine. It tries to be more stupid about what it's actually looking at. So I've been rolling with that. Okay, so probably we are a little bit behind on our commits here. So why don't we make some commits? Why don't we say something like update Tailwind, and maybe we'll, so that's focus styles. Looks like everything here is focus styles and keyboard navigation. So maybe we can combine those into one. We'll just kind of do it all in one ugly commit, I guess. Okay, so we'll just say improve keyboard accessibility and focus styles, something like that. Cool. All right, so I regret committing that with that modal being permanently open. And I also think we should probably do, okay, let's do this focus out stuff as well. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to amend that commit. So git add all, git commit -- amend. We'll just keep that. So now if we look at the history, it won't show that we tried to like, shit. Where did those styles get committed? We must have done that in the thank you section. Okay, no big deal. Not the cleanest commit history, but it's okay. So let's just do another commit where we remove the focus out handling altogether. And replace it maybe with some outer click behavior or something. Let me think about it. So there's like a couple different libraries that you can use with Vue for handling, like clicking outside of an element, that add them as directives. Or we could kind of build it as a component, which is always kind of fun. So maybe we'll do that just for shits and giggles. Create a new file here called onClickOutside.vue. And we'll give it a render function. And it's going to return this .scoped slots, or this .slots .default 0. And it's going to have a do prop. I'll show you what I'm trying to do here. So here in the complete purchase modal, we can import onClickOutside from /onClickOutside.vue. And around the actual modal itself, which is this piece, we can add a onClickOutside component with a do prop, which just says what should happen when someone clicks outside of it. And we'll close that off here. Whoa. And for now, let's just we'll say handle click outside. And we'll change handle focus out to handle click outside. And let's just do console.log clicked outside. Well, I'll comment this stuff out for now. So let's just see if that modal still even opens. Looks like it does, so that's good. Although we do have a console error. Unknown custom element on click outside. Of course, forgot to register the component. On click outside. Okay, so that still opens, so that's good. So what we've created here is like a very kind of like the boilerplate for like a renderless Vue component, where the component itself, this onClick outside, doesn't actually render any new markup. It only renders what was passed to it, but it has some behavior, which we haven't actually set up yet, of course. But basically, we need to do something like on the created hook, we need to add an event listener to the document. So we need to say like documents.add event listener click. And here we can say like const handle click equals takes an event, and we're going to bind handle click here. We're also going to say this dot once hook just before destroy. This is just some boilerplate. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm setting up a global event listener, and then before the component is destroyed, I want to remove that event listener. So we'll remove the click event listener. And then we can actually figure out what the behavior of this should be. So let's just console.log e for a second. I've implemented this before, and we could just copy and paste it, but it's a little bit more fun if we figure it out together. Okay, so we get a mouse event fired. And we get a target. And yeah, I think that's probably the only thing that we need to worry about too much. Now, we might actually have to do this on mounted because we need access to something. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So basically what we want to do here is we want to console.log e.target, right? And that's going to be whatever was clicked. So if I click this, you can see we got that. If I click this, we get the background. Here I get the button. What we want to happen is that when I click outside of this element, I want to fire some function. But I only want that function to fire if the click actually did happen outside of this element. So how do we tell if it happened outside of the element? I think the easiest way to do that is basically to check if, so if we say console.log console.log this.l and e.target for a second here. Okay, so we get two logs. The first is the actual modal, and the second one is whatever was actually clicked. So we want to basically know is what they clicked inside of the modal. And we can check that by console.logging e.contains or l.contains e.target. So I'll show you this. So now if I click on the outside, we get false. It doesn't contain that. But if I click on this input, well, it does contain that, right? But if I click outside, well, it doesn't contain that. If I click on the thing itself, it comes back as true because I guess it's saying it does contain itself, but based on implementations I've seen, it sounds like maybe that's not consistent across all browsers. So what a lot of people will do is they'll check that it contains the target or that it is the target. So I think what we want to basically do is like if this.$l.contains e.target or this.$l is e.target, then we can do like a guard clause, just return. Otherwise, we want to run the do function that was passed through. So let's see what happens here. If handle click outside gets passed through, we say clicked outside, so that should only run if we actually click outside. So clicked outside, nothing, clicked outside. Cool. Looks like it's working. Now the thing that's a little bit funky is you can see like clicked outside is running even though the modal isn't even open. So we can fix that by in handle click outside only doing any work if the modal is showing, right? So we could do something like, if not this dot open, let's just return. Otherwise we'll log. Okay, so nothing. But now clicked outside happens because it's open. So instead of just logging clicked outside, why don't we emit a close event? Okay, so I can open this. Now if I click outside of it, it closes. One thing that'd be interesting to see is does it preserve our form history? And it does. So that's kind of cool. So pretty good, I think. I think maybe that'll be a good place to wrap it up for today. So why don't we commit this? So we'll just say close complete purchase modal when clicking outside. When clicking outside, I mean, that seems fine. And maybe what we'll do is we'll look at the responsive stuff in another stream. So I'm going to try and get back into doing these streams a lot more regularly. I'm hoping for twice a week to do like a 1 hour stream on this stuff. It seems pretty doable, especially since I don't really have to do any preparation for it or anything. We can just kind of do it and have some fun. So why don't we say that I'll try and do another one of these on Friday, and we can work on some responsive stuff then, and maybe get into some validation or some other stuff related to that. So hopefully this was entertaining or educational or whatever. Thanks for checking out the streams as always, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't, and then you'll get notified whenever I do any more of them. So thanks everyone. See you on the next one.